Tom, welcome to the show. All going off at PSG as normal. A big week last week in a bad way, and then some atmosphere, I guess, at the weekend. The booing of Messi and Neymar. Was that something that came as a surprise to you? Was it a surprise to the French football world in general? I've got to admit, I don't follow it that closely, but it felt very, very hostile towards two of the best players in the world.
The dissent was expected. The PSG fan group, the Collectif Ultra Paris, had put out a statement on Saturday on the eve of the game, making it clear that they weren't happy over the elimination in the Champions League, but also various other aspects of how the club is run. And I think given the nature of PSG's elimination, yet another humiliating capitulation. And, in this case, from what seemed to be a position of real strength, being 2-0 up on aggregate with only half an hour to play. So there was always going to be some sort of reaction. I think what has surprised people has been the extent to which it was targeted at Lionel Messi and Neymar. All the players, apart from Mbappe, were booed when the teams read out before the game, and they were pretty much all booed during the game. But the players who were booed the most were Messi and Neymar, despite the fact that they weren't particularly culpable for what happened in that game against Madrid. Messi didn't have a great game. Neymar didn't have a great game, although he did set up the PSG goal. But I think the decision to target those two players in particular was the fans' way of sending out a message, not just about that performance against Real Madrid, not just about PSG's latest humiliation in the Champions League, but about the whole project, because Messi and Neymar, more than any other players, symbolize this kind of Galacticos approach that PSG have adopted in recent years, just piling superstar on top of superstar on top of superstar, and expecting whoever the coach happens to be to turn that group of players into a winning team. So that's the element that I think was the most surprising, because everyone knows what an incredible footballer Messi is, and for him to be getting booed by the entire stadium a mere matter of months after he was welcomed there as a hero was pretty striking. And I think it just speaks to the fact that a lot of PSG fans, not all PSG fans, but a lot of PSG fans, a lot of match-going PSG fans have had enough of this approach. They want to see a team that is properly constructed, that plays with a degree of coherence, where the star players aren't basically allowed to do whatever they want, where they will actually, sort of subscribe to some kind of footballing project. That's why Messi and Neymar copped it, more than anyone else.
Obviously, the result against Real Madrid was the straw that broke the camel's back a little bit. But in the statement, it's quite a long statement. It mentions players going to Fashion Week, among other elements of the last few years. But there's a sentence there about the club's current situation requires complete reorganization at all levels going forward and the daily presence of its president. So a lot of it seems to be really directed at the kind of hierarchy, President Nasser Al-Khelaifi. So what are the other issues at play here, bar just that embarrassing defeat?
Where do you start? There are so many issues at PSG. I think the fundamental issue is the sort of drift that has been allowed to set in on the sporting side. And, you compare PSG to Manchester City, for example. Manchester City have put the sporting side of the project right at the heart of it. They are, before anything else, a very well-run, very successful football team who hired the outstanding coach of his generation and then gave him the means to build the sort of team that he wanted to build. And we've seen the success that they've had off the back of that, albeit they too are still yet to win their first Champions League. What's happened at PSG is that the coach is not at the heart of the project at all. They have hired some of the best coaches in the world in recent years. Carlo Ancelotti, Laurent Blanc, Unai Emery, Thomas Tuchel, Mauricio Pochettino, and the last one who really succeeded in giving the team any sort of identity was Laurent Blanc, and he left in 2016. Ever since then, we've seen a succession of, demonstrably accomplished coaches struggle with this bloated squad with all these superstar players, and ultimately fail to find a way to make them A, play attractive football, and B, win the Champions League, which, as we know, has been the main objective of the Qataris ever since they arrived. I thought it was interesting that the statement that the CUP fan group put out on Saturday named Al Khalifi, because that hadn't happened before. And one of the reasons for that is there's quite a close relationship between Al Khalifi and that specific group of PSG fans, because when the Qataris took over, the PSG ultras had been banned from the stadium because of all the violence that had been a recurrent issue in previous years. And that happened in 2010. The Qataris arrived in 2011, and it was only at Al Khalifi's behest in 2016 that the fans were allowed back in to the stadium, because he saw, and I suspect probably, felt a bit of pressure from the players to bring the fans back in, knowing the sort of benefits that would give the team. And I think that's why previously those PSG ultras have been low to criticize Al Khalifi, because they are so sort of dependent on him for access to the stadium. But he is, he wears multiple hats. Al Khalifi, he's also in charge of being sports, and he's not present in Paris, on a day-to-day basis. And I think there's a feeling within the fan base that the football side of things just needs shaking up, and it needs people putting in place who are going to run it properly. And I've seen no suggestions whatsoever that Nasser Al Khalifi is in any danger in terms of his position as PSG president. But I think if you sort of look a little bit further down the hierarchy, there's a general acceptance that Mauricio Pochettino will leave at the end of the season. He hasn't been happy at all, really, since he arrived in January last year. And then above him, Leonardo, who's one of the other faces of the current PSG project. He, more than anyone, is responsible for the recruitment strategy that has seen PSG just pile up all these superstar players, without really thinking too much about how they're all going to fit together. So I think if there is to be some kind of shake-up on like a management level, it's probably more likely we're going to see the coach and the sporting director depart than anyone higher up the chain.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Leonardo, because it's quite a one-direction transfer policy, just bringing in the big stars, and surely at some point he must come under some pressure, because you spoke about Man City and the way they develop. They've got kids coming through, that everything's geared around the academy, geared around the infrastructure within Manchester City Football Club. Paris, it doesn't really seem like that at all. It does just seem that there's this massive focus on being a brand, bringing in the biggest names, and I guess that's what the ultras are sick of.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at their recent transfer dealings, what they reflect is that rather than being focused on long-term planning, Leonardo is more of an opportunist, someone who reacts to possibilities. You look at the fact that they brought in Sergio Ramos last summer, Gianluigi Donnarumma. They didn't need to sign Gianluigi Donnarumma. They already had one of the best goalkeepers in Europe in Kylian Mbappe, a goalkeeper who had never put a foot wrong for PSG previously, very popular within the changing room, particularly with all the other South American players. But they saw the opportunity to sign Donnarumma. Leonardo, from his links with AC Milan, has got lots of great connections in Italy. And I guess they saw it as one for the future. But then what that means is that all of a sudden, Mauricio Pochettino and his coaching staff go into the season having to manage this really uncomfortable situation of having two elite goalkeepers, both of whom deserve to play, but who can only play one game at a time. Of course, unfortunately for him, Donnarumma was the guy who sort of precipitated the collapse in Madrid with that error for the first goal. Even though I don't think you can attribute that to the way that that he's been managed by Pochettino, the way that Pochettino has managed the goalkeeping situation, it just sort of shines a spotlight on, that lack of, that lack of sort of foresight in terms of, in terms of how the squad is assembled. I mean, PSG's academy does produce good players. That is something that has improved a lot since the Qataris came in. I mean, the number of players who'd slipped through the net previously, we all know what fertile terrain that the Paris suburbs are in terms of producing young players. And historically, Paris has done a very bad job at holding on to them. In recent years, they've been bringing more of those players through. But again, the difficulty then is that, players might get a few minutes in the first team, but they are happy to compete with all the superstars. And so in recent years, we've seen a lot of those players getting a taste of first team football at PSG, but then realizing that actually they're better served by leaving. You look at some of the players who've ended up in the Bundesliga, Christopher Nkunku, Moussa Diaby, as a couple of examples, who are absolutely flying in Germany, having seen that the writing was on the wall in terms of their first team opportunities. And I think that's something that the fans, the fans who protested during the Bordeaux game at the weekend want to see more of. They want to see a team with a clearer local identity. You look at that PSG team, when everyone's fit, the only homegrown player who starts is Presnel Kimpembe, who is an exceptional defender, but again, prone to inconsistency, prone to the odd mistake. Adrien Rabiot previously, but then left to Juventus. So that is something that I think the fans would like to see change. And Leonardo, he admits that he's not very good at selling players, that he's much better at buying players than selling players, and so PSG just sort of rack up players, and you've got like Julian Draxler.
Yeah,
Julian Draxler has been at PSG for years. They bought him in January 2017, and he had a brilliant 4 or 5 months, and you thought, wow, what a player. And then they signed Mbappe and Neymar that same summer, and he disappeared, and he's been there ever since. And every time they try and sell him, he's like, well, actually, I'm okay. I quite like Paris. I get quite well paid here, so I'm good. I'm gonna stick around if that's all right with you. And the same thing with all the other squad players who don't play, but who would much rather be picking up their vast wage checks every month rather than leaving and going abroad. And yeah, it has left PSG with this big, bloated, unmanageable squad, and I think Leonardo has to carry responsibility for that.
What about Messi as well? Because obviously it seemed like he didn't want to leave Barcelona, but there was also an aspect of, could he be the final piece in this ridiculous PSG puzzle of superstars? But I think anyone who's watched them at all this season can tell something's not quite right. Doesn't look happy. He doesn't seem to be playing with the same kind of freedom and joy that he played with at Barcelona. So what's the feeling on his future?
I mean, it's really sad seeing what's happened to Messi this season. I mean, you get the occasional flicker, and it hasn't all been bad, but an awful lot of the time you find yourself watching him and thinking, what has happened to him? It feels like, one thing that strikes me is that he's not lost his ability to deceive defenders and throw them off balance, but he seems to have lost that first little burst of acceleration that used to take him away from people. And you see him occasionally attempt to get past someone, and the skill is still there, but that little burst has gone. And it could be a reflection of the fact that, quite apart from the enormous upheaval of having to leave Barcelona against his wishes, uproot his family, join a club he didn't want to join, move to a city he didn't want to move to. Last summer was quite tricky in terms of his sort of physical preparation, because he had the Copa America with Argentina, big emotional high of winning it for the first time. Didn't get much of a preseason. Then he's got this big transfer, and immediately he's in the PSG team. He's had, a few sort of injury issues. He had COVID at one point. So, it could be the case that he needs a bit of a rest and that he'll come back even stronger next season. I get the impression that if you were to ask him if he could click his fingers and go back to Barcelona would he? He would absolutely snap your hand off. But the problem is that he's under contract until the end of next season, and then there's an option for another year. So if he is to leave PSG, someone needs to buy him out of his contract. And PSG showed last summer, when they rejected that succession of offers from Real Madrid for Kylian Mbappe, that they're not prepared to budge when it comes to relinquishing their superstar players, and particularly when you take into account the fact that Mbappe looks increasingly certain to leave PSG this summer for Real Madrid, in what will be a huge reputational blow to PSG, quite apart from the fact that, you know, they will lose arguably the world's outstanding player at the moment. The fact of having said repeatedly, we will never sell him to Real Madrid, he will never be allowed to leave, he is the project, he is the future. Him losing is a massive body blow to PSG. So that will only double their determination to hold on to Messi. So yeah, even though he's obviously not quite right, I think it's very difficult for him to leave PSG this summer.